Well, now members of Ghana's National Media Commission have not been paid for the last 10 months. That's according to their representative of the Private Newspapers Publishers Association, Nilaye Soa. Speaking at today's event to mark International Press Freedom Day held here in Accra, Mr. Soa says the commission is handicapped from playing its watchdog role due to poor resourcing.
We don't have any single journalist in jail today as we are speaking to you. But there is a problem that we are facing on the media front that the GJA president raised. But he was not radical enough. As we are speaking to you now, 3-4 weeks ago, media commissioner complaining, 9 solid months. We are entering May. They have not been paid. As the apex body, what radical measures are we taking to ensure that our commissioners are paid? That is the first proposition. Proposal number 2. It is the duty of the Media Commission to ensure that media owners, both print and electronic, and I'm being self-critical now, it is the duty of Primpact, GIBA, community radio station owners to ensure that we stop paying these slavish salaries to our workers.
We'll also look at some fundamental challenges journalists face in performing their duties. My name is Stephen Enti, and this is today's big story. In the studio, Dr. Echeisikanku, is great to have you in the studio, and Famous Atichobe is our lead producer here. World Press Freedom Day tomorrow. Doc, let me start with you. I mean, looking at the issues that the NMC raised, for example, does it surprise you that as a media regulator, here we are, they're complaining of lack of resources and even salaries not coming in good time? What picture does it paint for our press freedom as a country?
Well, I think it goes even beyond press freedom. I think it is a microcosm of the state of anemia in which the country is in. I don't think that if you went across a broad spectrum of workers in the country, they might not be the only people suffering from something like that. And I think that they have brought it to the forefront because of the positions they occupy within the national psyche, because it's the media. But narrowing it down to the media itself, if these are supposed to be the professional bodies, as you rightly said, that regulate the media industry, that are supposed to perform their watchdog as the policeman of the policeman, you know, policing the policemen as watchdogs, I think it's a very sad and sorry situation that they don't even have the capability to do that, and that is something that should not be encouraged.
Very sad. Famous, let me come to you. Hey, welcome from your vacation, man. You look fresh, well rested and everything.
Oh, come on.
Now, seriously, I know you've done an incredible lot of work in producing media content for our wide audience. Now, in your everyday work, I mean, what do you see as some of the nitty-gritty challenges that stall the progress of your work as a journalist?
Well, basically, right, it has to do with some perceptions and misconceptions about certain key personalities within the media, as well as the media setup that you represent. You know, the times when you decide to call up someone for an interview or try to have some program put together, and depending on which media house you're coming from, or depending on how you actually present your case to them, sometimes they're a bit skeptical and they don't trust your judgment. Some would actually think that you're deliberately trying to bring them in to knock heads and embarrass them. And these are some examples that, you know, just a few of those examples that you go through being a producer or being a journalist trying to get an interview from a source. I think generally it's because of the politics that surround the work that we do, and also because, unfortunately, the media has not been positioned such that, you know, we've been able to gain that respect as being totally independent. Because we know that there are some persons within the fraternity who are patronized, you know, by some of these politicians and other institutions of authority. So, you know, it's sad that the media has not, to a large extent, yet gained that independence and respect. So it trickles down.
You think we have a lot more to go
I think definitely,
that total independence?
Definitely, there's a lot more to be done. It boils down from the training institutions right down to the setups, the media institution which are set up to employ some of these persons. It depends on the editorial policy that exists to regulate the work that you do. It also depends on the regulators themselves in terms of the media commission.
The regulators themselves
and
are
all that.
able to bite. That's the problem we have.
So
now, I'm begging pardon, I'll cut you briefly and get onto the telephone lines. I'm told that we are joined by Suleiman Brahma, who is the Deputy Executive Director of the Media Foundation for West Africa. Good evening, sir, and thanks for joining us on today's Big Story. Good evening, sir, and thanks for joining us on today's Big Story. Well, I think we're facing challenges getting Suleiman Brahma. Well, hello, good evening, sir. Right, I think we lost. So, Famous, you were saying, giving us a clear example of the kinds of things that constitute challenge. But don't you think that since, I mean, the 1992 Constitution, which gave a little more freedoms to the media, we haven't done exactly bad at all? Wouldn't you say so?
It's still work in progress. I mean, of course, with the repeal of the criminal libel law, it was just to give us more room to operate, especially when you would not be in breach of a law for the mere fact that you go and expose a crime, but at least there is some protection that's given to you as a practitioner. But then again, the other question to ask is how professional have we been? How many stories have been published? How many retractions have been done? How much research goes into each story that we do? What's the capacity that we build as journalists and all that? What's the respect, the reputation and all that? What's the ideology that guides our operations? I mean, and these are issues that culminate together to create an impression of the media. For some, it's growing. For some, we still have a lot of work to do. I mean, there are clear examples of media houses in Ghana perceived to be more professional and credible. There are others that people don't take serious at all. And I think that for a population of about 25 million, and you know, there's been a lot of polarization.
Right, Famous, I'll cut you. I beg your pardon. I'm so sorry, but I don't want to lose Brahma, Suleiman Brahma. Good evening, sir, and thanks for joining us on today's Big Story.
Good evening, and thank you for having me.
Yes, I mean, one of the key things as journalists in this country is how proportional our story coverage represents our development ideals and goals. Do you see a disconnect between the work journalists do and our ambition of fostering development and growth in our country?
Well, thank you very much again for having me. I think that it's an issue that you would want to see the media reflecting the national development agenda. And therefore, to the extent that our media sometimes, newspapers, and radio, television discussions are dominated by politics, then it would be right to say that there is some level of disconnect. But I think that we should look at it beyond the media themselves to ask ourselves whether or not as a country we even have a national development agenda on which we would therefore require the media to focus. I think that as we speak now, the National Development Planning Commission doesn't have a national development plan. But I mean, that focuses on 2015 and going forward. So you then ask yourself, are journalists supposed to determine what our national development agenda is? Or are we supposed to be looking at what the various ministries, departments, and agencies are dealing with as the nation's agenda, and therefore to follow those? So yes, journalists have a role to play, but I think that as a country, and government for that matter, need to also be clear on what our agenda for development is.
Talking about clear development agenda, let's shift the focus slightly towards clear communication from government. I do know that the Media Foundation for West Africa has been critical of what you call miscommunication or confused communication from government. Do you think that the government communication machinery, and when I say government, I do not mean this particular government, but in Ghana generally, communication that have come from governments, have they been well aligned to the development needs of the country, and have they been in tune with particular development strategies?
Well, I think that we have had problems all the time when it comes to government communication. And as you rightly say, maybe we shouldn't limit it to this current government. Of course, the current government perhaps is doing very bad when it comes to government communication, but that is not to say that previous governments were perfect. I think that under the MPP regime, we had a situation where within the 8-year period, we had 6 different ministers of information. And that clearly tells you that it was an average of less than 2 years per minister.
Yeah.
And I think it's a reflection of how perhaps government was quite uncomfortable with its information machinery as far as the ministry is concerned. Now, with the current government, which I think is much more important because our current development depends on what government we have at the moment, really not about governments we've had in the past. And I think that almost everyone who is familiar with proper communication or communication strategies and so on will tell you that there's a lot of problem with the current government's communication machinery. Indeed, not too long ago, you had a whole minister sitting on public radio and saying that he is uncomfortable with a colleague minister being honest and frank with the economy of the country. Beyond that, I mean, just about 2 weeks to that, you had another minister from the information ministry saying things, that ran counter to what his colleague minister from the same ministry has said.
Right. We
have a system where we have a minister for information, the media relations, 2 deputies. At the presidency, you have the head of communication, and we don't know whether he is at the same time the spokesperson for the president. You have a communications bureau at the presidency. So the whole thing is quite convoluted to the extent that really you don't know who is doing what. At sometimes you have the minister for information signing public communication from the government.
Right.
At another point, it is the chief of staff. At another point, it's executive secretary to the president. I mean, it's so problematic.
Right. Mr. Brahma, we're very grateful for your time on today's big story. Mr. Brahma is Executive Director of the Media Foundation for West Africa. Let's come to the studio. Doc, let me lump together a lot of the things that Mr. Brahma raised. He raised issues about proper communication and structures, really, from government communication to the journalists working to promote development agenda in the right frame. Now, that brings me back to training, the type of training journalists are supposed to get for us to be efficient and effective in reporting for the current time. Tell us about what is required to bring out that journalists we need to do the work that Mr. Brahma says must be done well, either in government or in communicating the development agenda.
Well, definitely training is very important, and people have had occasion, especially the public who we serve as journalists, have had occasion to complain about the depth or the professionalism or the quality of journalism that we provide, and Famous spoke to some of these. Journalism training is very important, and I think the first thing is that in this country, the reputation that journalism holds within the public psyche is very low. You never have people when we were growing up saying they wanted to be journalists. You dare not.
You dare not.
Yeah, you have to say you want to become a lawyer, a doctor, or whatever it is. So first of all, I think that people don't attach that kind of importance to it. When I was working at CTF, I would go and cover a program, and people would ask me if I did a diploma or I just finished high school. They couldn't afford take the fact that you have a first degree or a master's and you are working as a journalist. So in terms of journalism developing, I think first of all, we need to understand that it is a calling and it is a genuine career. It is the fourth estate and it is the last bulwark to democracy. Secondly, in order to do that, once we have recognized that, then it means that people are going to give journalism the needed attention, people are going to give journalism the needed resources that they need in terms of training in order for us to have the kind of journalists that we want. When I was in Iowa, I had people who would be doing medicine and journalism at the same time, because they wanted to go and become medical reporters. You know, but that was because this is a society which understands that this is an industry that needs to be developed in order to stand on its own, and for people to go out there and contribute a little bit to development. So I think that it is a social issue, and then once we are able to revolutionize the psyche, people can then contribute effectively for us to be able to get the right material that we need to sustain our democracy.
Famous, I realize you're in agreement with a lot of the things.
A lot of things that Doc has said, as well as a lot of things that Brahma talked about. For me, I'm looking at the bigger picture, beyond the journalist.
And what is the bigger picture?
The bigger picture goes beyond the journalist. It's communication, public relations, journalism. Because you see, when you've studied all these trends, there are so many theories.
But how many of our journalists have first degrees like you have?
Well, it's a gradual process. GIJ, AUCC, the School of Communication Studies, it is improving. It's getting better. But that's what I'm saying. I'm looking at the bigger picture in terms of communication, because that's the mother, that's the umbrella, you know, for public relations and for journalism practice generally in Ghana. Many theories, the social responsibility theories, the agenda setting theories, as well as the public interest theories. It tells us that definitely for us journalists, it's important that for everything that we do, we bear in mind that the guiding principles that should help us effect our work, you know, efficiently. And for the communicators within government and other setups, it's equally important.
So really, what I'm getting from you is suggesting that we are our own problem.
Yes,
we
the problem is not just
the bad image for our own
the problem is not just coming from the journalists per se. It's also coming from people who are perceived to be communicators. It's equally important that the training goes beyond the journalism media houses per se, but it should be extended to government communicators as well as other so-called PROs in whatever setup they find themselves. Because if you have a PRO or communications person who is equally not qualified and understand the nitty-gritties or the ethics that govern
then they don't even know what they are communicating.
Then they are miscommunicating to you in the first place. And because you've also not trained yourself to understand the profession, you also misunderstand and also miscommunicate. So it's multifaceted, it's secular. It goes beyond the journalists. It's for communicators in general.
You know, when we look back at the fact that there have been press freedoms from 1992 to now, we say that the media is undergoing transformation and changes, which we expect to make it better. Now, let me come in with a bit of an academic expose of that. When you look at 92 up to today, what trends are you seeing? Are we getting better? Have we taken advantage of the press freedoms and the media freedoms we get to do our work better?
I can say a little bit about that. I think to an extent, yes. I did a study in which I was looking at how the media influence each other using a concept called intermedia agenda setting. Basically, it tries to look at how the media mirror each other's agenda or how they copy each other's agenda. Because previous research had found in other places that smaller newspapers will always copy from the bigger papers. You know, so if you are talking about the quality, the development, the growth of the media, I found that despite the fact that we do have a liberalized media industry, paying homage to the liberalization of the repeal of the criminal libel law, pluralized democracy, media systems and all that, I realized that despite that plurality, it has not necessarily led to a growth and development of the media, because most of the media houses, or some I should say, were taking their leads off the GNA. So you find people who sit and wait for wire stories to come through, except a few. Exactly, we're not doing proactive journalism, except a few, and we know them, like your media institution and others who have taken the initiative to go out there and do some legwork, some investigation. Most of the time you find out that some will just take reprints of the Daily Graph, and you find them mirroring each other. What this means is that one or certain media in the country have a more dominant agenda setting role because they set the issues for discussion. In effect, it also affects the development and the growth of the media, because it will mean that certain issues are not being discussed. You know, because the issues that are being discussed will only serve the interest of a few people here, and so you go to Bogatanga, you go to Techiman, and there might be issues that are affecting them, but we don't get to hear it. You know, so there are economic barriers, there are political barriers, financial barriers, and so on and so forth. And so, if you ask me, across a broad trajectory, you know, in terms of the growth and development of the media, yes, we have the basis right, we have set ourselves on the right pedestal, but then we need to stop seeing this as an experiment. We really need to grow.
I like that. We need to stop seeing this as an experiment.
Specialization.
Are we being very ethical and living within the rules of ethics and the law in our work?
Issues of ethics, for me, is almost always relative. What is ethical to you may not be ethical to someone else, or depends on where you operate. Some things within certain contexts may seem ethical, but bring it to another context, it's unethical because of cultural dynamics, socio-cultural dynamics, and all that. So it's important to understand your audience first, and then know the right medium through which you're communicating, and most importantly, feedback. Because if you're not using all these key elements, you would get it wrong. You may think you're communicating effectively. Bear in mind, what's important at the end of the day is driving the development agenda. So if you set the wrong target, or if you set the wrong agenda and you have people following, at the end of the day, what are we doing to ourselves? We're not achieving anything. We're only following the bandwagon with the politics and all that, and it's decaying the system. And like I said, because we're not specialized, almost always people or charlatans
almost everywhere, decaying the system. Is that what really is? There are some of these bad nuts.
I think it's important that we admit. It's important that we admit that there are charlatans in the system. Otherwise, when we pretend that all is well and decide to pat ourselves on the back, I think that we'll not be doing ourselves, you know,
a lot of good,
because we need to compare what we do. I mean, it's not that difficult. Listen to BBC, watch CNN, watch Al Jazeera, read why. There's information everywhere. What stops you from adding on? You understand? So I think that by and large, it's not just with the individual, but even with the corporate setups, the places where we find ourselves, the media houses, the ideologies that guide our work and all that.
I say that you should have made a comparison with GTV.
No, it's not important to do the comparisons, you know, in as much as we're in competition. We're looking at the broader picture here.
That's right.
And whatever we do at the end of the day is not for our consumption, but it's for the masses.
For the masses and our audience.
Yes.
So, Doc, Dr. Chikegu, let me take us away from Ghana a little and look at the broad global trend across the world. How are you seeing media freedoms?
So I think that broadly speaking, because of the wave of democratization that has taken place, the upsurge of the internet and technological development, the new media that has brought a lot of enlightenment, you know, and people have become more aware of their freedoms and all that. So and we know that the World Press Freedom Index tracks press freedom across the world. And I think the latest one that they revealed, Ghana was classified as one of the most freest, you know, countries in terms of world press. We rank pretty high on that index.
We should be proud of that, shouldn't we?
Absolutely.
I mean, you've got a few knuckles and hits to journalists who you know, want to do good things and expose some issues, but I mean, by and large, mainly we've done great.
But see, I think again we should ask ourselves, what was with the press freedom agenda? What was with repealing the criminal libel law? Because essentially the media was being gagged from expression, from free expression. The fact that there is free expression does not mean that we just go out there and talk.
We're mixing the two because we have to responsible media.
That's the most important thing.
Where you're
responsible to your audience, you're responsible to the masses, you're responsible to the ethics of your profession, and responsible to, I mean, even the media house that you represent, the responsibilities cut across. And I think the most important is for you to use your conscience. That's, for me, the fundamental thing as an individual.
Use your conscience. Well, Dr. Eche Sikanku, let me give you the chance to wrap up so that we'll bring the curtains to a close. Media freedoms. In Ghana, we have seen a lot of changes. Radio, broadcast media, has grown tremendously, while at the same time it does appear that the newspaper, which the trend around the world is newspapers are collapsing, are not collapsing really. They're doing pretty well, but not as well as we would want. What do you foresee in the next 5 years for the sustenance of the media? Are we going to be around?
Absolutely, you know, they cannot do without us, you know, because it's a natural human instinct to thirst for information. We always want to know what is happening in your neighbor's world, even in the pre-colonial times, you know. Oh, they say this is happening, they say that. So that is natural, and it's going to be there. But in terms of the changes that will take place, you mentioned the print, you mentioned the radio, TV, electronic, and so on and so forth. I think that just like any development issue, Africa is always lagging behind, and there's an advantage to that because people say that we have the chance to leapfrog some of the difficulties that other people had. And so I do foresee a time when we'll probably be facing the same challenges that the developed world are having in terms of the change of their media terrain. You know, somebody said that in 10 years to come, the New York Times is going to be a museum relic. Nobody's going to read that paper anymore because, but it ties in with the access to the internet.
To go on the internet and read the newspaper, log on to their iPhones and Blackberries and get on with it.
Exactly. So it ties into that. So we will be getting there, but then it ties into internet access, internet affordability, education, ICT, and all of that. So we need to tackle it side by side.
Right. Thank you. Famous.
I mean, listen to all this reminds me of a proverb that says that until the lions tell their own stories, the tales of hunting would always glorify the hunter.
That's Nana Sakwa.
Yes. Well, that's not his saying, though. He loves to use that quote a lot. It tells us to tell our own story in the positive light.
Right.
That for me is very important. There's so many good things happening, and unfortunately we are not reflecting them.
Right. We have to tell our own story. That's how we bring it to a close. My name is Stephen N.